Hello friends, I am Apple, and you are now listening to Apple Knows channel. Let me take you into a world where the most unbelievable things are actually true, and all of them come straight from the history of cinema. Stay with me, because the deeper we go, the more you will realize that Hollywood hides stories stranger than any movie itself. Did you know that in the movie The Wizard of Oz from 1939, the yellow brick road was painted with industrial-grade paint so toxic that it caused breathing problems for some of the actors? Even worse, the Tin Man's silver makeup was made of pure aluminum powder, and it poisoned the actor Buddy Ebsen so severely that he ended up in the hospital, forcing him to leave the role. That is how dangerous movie sets could be. But that is not the only shocking fact. Let's talk about Apocalypse Now. Filming this movie was so chaotic that it became legendary. The director Francis Ford Coppola invested his own money, had a nervous breakdown, and even threatened to take his life while shooting. The actor Martin Sheen suffered a real heart attack on set, and instead of shutting production down, Coppola just hid the truth from the studio and continued filming as if nothing had happened. Now here is something that will truly make you pause. In the movie The Passion of the Christ directed by Mel Gibson, the actor Jim Caviezel who played Jesus was struck by lightning during filming of the crucifixion scene. Not once, but twice. He also dislocated his shoulder while carrying the cross and caught hypothermia during the long hours of shooting outdoors. He later said he felt cursed by the role, but he never walked away from it. And speaking of cursed productions, Poltergeist has one of the darkest reputations in Hollywood. The skeletons in the infamous swimming pool scene were not props. They were real human skeletons purchased from a medical supplier because it was cheaper than making fake ones. Later, several cast members died in strange and tragic circumstances, giving rise to the idea that the movie was haunted. If you think this cannot get more unsettling, listen to this. In The Dark Knight, Heath Ledger locked himself in a hotel room for weeks to prepare for the role of the Joker, keeping a diary where he scribbled disturbing notes and thoughts as the character. After his tragic death, many wondered if his deep dive into the Joker's psychology had taken a fatal toll on his mind. Now let me throw something totally unexpected. In the original Star Wars, George Lucas had no money for fancy effects. The sound of the lightsaber, which became iconic, was created by recording the hum of an old movie projector combined with the buzz of a broken television set. Even Darth Vader's breathing came from a simple scuba regulator. Out of scraps, they built a universe. And here is one more fact to shake you. In The Exorcist, the actor who played Father Karras' mother actually had no acting experience. She was just a woman from the director's neighborhood. During the infamous scene in the hospital, the medical staff shown on screen were not actors either. They were real doctors performing a real medical procedure. What you see is not Hollywood trickery, it is real-life medicine happening right in front of the camera. You might think you've heard it all, but trust me, what comes next will make you look at some of your favorite films in an entirely new way. Take for example the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Viggo Mortensen, who played Aragorn, was so committed to his role that he performed many of his own stunts. During the filming of The Two Towers, he kicked a helmet after believing his character's friends had died. What you see on screen is him collapsing and screaming in pain. That wasn't acting. He had broken 2 toes, but Peter Jackson kept the shot in the final cut because the emotion looked so raw. Now imagine this. In Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, Jack Nicholson prepared for his descent into madness by eating nothing but cheese sandwiches for weeks. Why? Because he hated them with a passion, and it put him in a permanently irritated state. Kubrick, obsessed with realism, pushed Shelley Duvall to her breaking point as well. She had to do the baseball bat scene 127 times until her hands were blistered and her voice was nearly gone. The fear you see in her eyes wasn't staged, it was genuine exhaustion and despair. Speaking of Kubrick, here's another twist. For the film Barry Lyndon, he wanted the candlelit scenes to look authentic, so he used special NASA lenses designed for photographing space. That's right, the same lenses made to capture the universe were used to shoot a period drama about the 18th century. Let's step into the world of horror for a moment. In the film A Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy Krueger's terrifying glove sound wasn't a fancy sound effect at all. The team recorded the noise of metal claws scraping across a leather chair. But the real nightmare was behind the scenes. The concept of Freddy was inspired by true events where people mysteriously died in their sleep after claiming to have terrifying nightmares. That real-life phenomenon, known as Asian death syndrome at the time, shocked medical experts and gave Wes Craven the seed for his villain. But here's something no one expects: the Titanic, directed by James Cameron, had its own bizarre mystery. One night, over 80 members of the cast and crew were rushed to the hospital after someone laced the clam chowder with PCP, a hallucinogenic drug. To this day, nobody knows who poisoned the food, and the culprit was never caught. Imagine making a film about one of the greatest disasters in history, and your own set turns into chaos because of a criminal prank. And don't think animation is free of disturbing truths. In Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the actress Adriana Caselotti who voiced Snow White was banned by Walt Disney from appearing in any other films or even on the radio. He wanted her voice to remain unique to Snow White forever, essentially ending her career in Hollywood at the age of 21. Let's start with one of the most shocking behind-the-scenes stories ever: The Crow, starring Brandon Lee. During filming, a prop gun was loaded incorrectly, and Brandon, the son of martial arts legend Bruce Lee, was fatally shot on set. He was only 28 years old. The tragedy mirrored his father's mysterious death years earlier, fueling rumors of a so-called Lee family curse. The film was finished using stunt doubles and early digital effects, but every time people watch it, they know part of what they're seeing is haunted by real loss. And speaking of tragic accidents, have you heard about the Twilight Zone, the movie incident in 1982? During a helicopter stunt gone wrong, actor Vic Morrow and two child actors were killed when the aircraft crashed on them. The tragedy led to years of lawsuits, stricter safety standards in Hollywood, and a permanent scar on the film industry. Now let's move to something less tragic but still mind-blowing. In Jurassic Park, the T-Rex animatronic was a masterpiece of engineering. But what most people don't know is that it would randomly malfunction when it got wet. During rainy scenes, the giant robot would come alive on its own, moving unpredictably, terrifying the cast and crew. Imagine being on set and suddenly this enormous predator starts twitching and lunging without warning. And here's a fact that will make you look twice at The Matrix. The famous bullet dodging scene with Neo required a brand new filming technique. They built a rig of 120 cameras arranged in a circle to capture every angle, something no one had ever tried before. That innovation not only changed special effects forever but also created the iconic bullet time look that's been copied endlessly since. But maybe the strangest story comes from the set of the Poltergeist sequels. Julian Beck, the actor who played the terrifying preacher Cain in Poltergeist 2, was actually battling stomach cancer while filming. His gaunt, skeletal appearance wasn't makeup, it was real. He died shortly after the film's release, adding even more fuel to the rumors of the so-called poltergeist curse. And you might not believe this, but in the original Psycho, Alfred Hitchcock deliberately kept the water cold during the shower scene to make Janet Leigh's screams more authentic. She later confessed she was so disturbed by the experience that she never took a shower again in her life, only baths. Even comedies hide dark truths. In The Wizard of Oz, the Munchkins were played by a troupe of little people who stayed at a hotel in Hollywood during production. Judy Garland later claimed in interviews that they partied so hard every night that police had to break things up regularly. Behind the magical fantasy of Oz was absolute chaos off-camera. Hollywood has always sold dreams, but the reality behind those dreams often feels like a nightmare, or at least something far stranger than fiction. Let's go straight into the facts that most studios would rather you never knew. Because the truth is, sometimes what happens behind the scenes is more shocking than what ends up on screen. Take for example Apocalypse Now again. Marlon Brando showed up to set overweight, unprepared, and refusing to learn his lines. Francis Ford Coppola was so desperate he filmed Brando mostly in shadows to hide his size and let him improvise huge chunks of dialogue. What looks like deliberate mystery in the film was really just the director trying to save a disaster. And here's something few people believe at first. In Raiders of the Lost Ark, the famous scene where Indiana Jones shoots the swordsman in the marketplace wasn't scripted. Harrison Ford was suffering from severe food poisoning that day and was too sick to film the planned fight sequence. So instead, he suggested simply pulling out his gun and shooting the guy. The crew loved it, the audience loved it, and it became one of the most iconic moments in movie history. Now let's talk about The Exorcist again, because the stories never stop. Linda Blair, who played the possessed girl, was only 12 years old. During the scene where her bed shakes violently, the harness that strapped her down broke. She injured her back so badly that she still has pain from it today. Her screams in that moment weren't acting, they were real agony. And speaking of cursed productions, let's move to The Omen from 1976. This film about the Antichrist seemed plagued by real evil. The actor Gregory Peck's plane was struck by lightning, the screenwriter's hotel was bombed by the IRA, and even a plane that was supposed to be used in filming crashed, killing everyone on board. The coincidences piled up so much that people still call it the cursed film. Now here's one that sounds too absurd to be true, but it is. In Mad Max, Fury Road, director George Miller insisted on shooting real stunts with actual vehicles in the desert. There was very little CGI. The giant truck crashes, the men swinging on poles, the explosions, all real. The film looks insane because the danger was actually happening in front of the camera. Even musical films carry strange truths. In Singin' in the Rain, Gene Kelly danced the iconic title number while running a high fever of 103. He performed take after take in heavy, wet clothes, under hot studio lights, and still delivered one of the most joyful performances ever filmed. Few people realize he was sick and miserable the whole time. And one more detail that feels like it belongs in a conspiracy theory but is simply true: in The Wizard of Oz, the actor playing the Cowardly Lion wore a costume made entirely out of real lion pelts. It weighed nearly 60 pounds, and under the hot studio lights, it smelled terrible. The actor Burt Lahr described it as unbearable, but it became one of the most recognizable costumes in film history. Every frame of a movie can hide a story of pain, improvisation, or pure chance. That's why cinema is never just what you see, it's also what you don't. Let's dive into even stranger truths that make movies more unbelievable the more you learn about them. Let's begin with one of the most dangerous shoots in film history, Roar from 1981. This movie used over 150 untrained lions, tigers, and leopards on set. The cast and crew were constantly attacked. The lead actress, Tippi Hedren, was bitten on the head and needed dozens of stitches. Her daughter, Melanie Griffith, was mauled so badly she needed facial reconstructive surgery. In total, over 70 people were injured during filming. The tagline of the movie was "No animals were harmed during the making of this film." 70 cast and crew members were. That was no joke. Now let's talk about James Bond. During the filming of Goldfinger, actress Shirley Eaton was painted head to toe in gold paint for the famous Golden Girl scene. But what few people know is that she was covered so completely that medics had to leave a small patch of skin unpainted on her stomach to allow her to breathe through her pores. The crew was terrified of something called skin suffocation, a real medical fear at the time. And here's something that sounds like a myth but is absolutely true. In The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, during the scene where Boromir dies, Sean Bean refused to take a helicopter to the remote mountain set because he was afraid of flying. Instead, he hiked up the snowy mountains every day in full costume and armor, carrying his sword and shield. While the rest of the cast flew in, Bean climbed like a true warrior. But nothing compares to what happened during the making of Fitzcarraldo, directed by Werner Herzog. The story of the film was about dragging a steamship over a mountain in the jungle, and Herzog decided to actually do it. No special effects. A real 320-ton ship was hauled through the Amazon by hundreds of locals. The shoot was so grueling that cast members were injured, some left production, and Herzog himself admitted he nearly lost his mind. And speaking of Herzog, his collaboration with actor Klaus Kinski is legendary for being one of the most toxic relationships in cinema. They screamed at each other constantly, and during the filming of Aguirre, The Wrath of God, Kinski got so furious that he threatened to walk off the set. Herzog later admitted he pointed a gun at him and told him if he left, he'd be shot. Somehow, the two went on to make 5 films together. Here's a lighter but equally bizarre fact. In the movie Alien, when the chestburster scene was filmed, the cast didn't know what was about to happen. Ridley Scott kept it a secret. So when the alien explodes out of John Hurt's chest, the actors' horrified screams and reactions were real. One actress even fainted. That's why the scene still feels so disturbingly authentic today. And if you thought children's movies were safe, think again. In Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, during the boat tunnel scene, the actors were not told what would happen. The psychedelic images, the screaming, the flashing lights, it was all sprung on them in the moment. Their confusion and fear on camera weren't scripted, they were real. The Wicked Witch of the West, played by Margaret Hamilton, was severely burned when a trapdoor malfunctioned during her fiery exit scene. Her green copper-based makeup was flammable, and she spent weeks in the hospital with second-degree burns on her face and hands. Even after healing, she had to avoid exposure to heat because the makeup could still ignite. Now move to Batman Returns. Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman costume was made of latex vacuum-sealed around her body. She could barely breathe inside it, and every time she put it on, a team had to glue her into the suit. She later admitted that wearing it was torture, and filming scenes in it felt like suffocating. Here's one that blends comedy with horror. In Ghostbusters, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man's explosion at the end was achieved by blasting the set with 500 gallons of shaving cream. The cream came crashing down so heavily on the actors that one stunt performer was nearly crushed. Bill Murray famously shouted, "I said marshmallow, not shaving cream," after being buried alive in foam. And now let's go darker. In Rosemary's Baby, actress Mia Farrow was actually served divorce papers by Frank Sinatra during the filming. She was devastated, but director Roman Polanski forced her to keep working. Even worse, some of the movie's crew later suffered strange misfortunes. The film's composer died suddenly of a brain clot, and Polanski's own wife, Sharon Tate, was murdered by the Manson family just a year after the release. To this day, many call it one of Hollywood's most cursed films. But curses don't end there. The Superman franchise has long been said to be haunted. George Reeves, the first actor to play Superman on TV, died mysteriously from a gunshot wound many believe wasn't suicide. Christopher Reeve, who famously played Superman in the movies, was paralyzed in a horse-riding accident. Several other cast members suffered tragic misfortunes. Fans began whispering about a Superman curse that follows anyone connected to the role. And then there's Stanley Kubrick's obsession with realism in Paths of Glory. For the battle scenes, he refused to use Hollywood pyrotechnics and insisted on real military explosives. The explosions were so powerful that crew members genuinely feared for their lives. Kubrick's perfectionism often crossed the line between art and danger. Even musicals carry disturbing stories. In The Sound of Music, during the boat scene where the children fall into the water, little Gretel nearly drowned because she couldn't swim. Julie Andrews had to rescue her while staying in character. That sweet family moment hides a terrifying near tragedy. And here's a fact that will change the way you see one of the most beloved comedies ever. During the filming of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, the cast was so poor they couldn't afford proper extras. Most of the peasants in the background are just the same actors recycled in different costumes, often carrying coconuts to mimic horsehooves because real horses were too expensive. What became a legendary joke was actually born from desperation. Let's begin with Titanic again, because that set was full of madness. Kate Winslet nearly drowned while filming a scene in the freezing water when her coat got caught on a gate underwater. She broke free, but afterward she said she was so shaken she almost quit acting entirely. And remember, James Cameron made the water ice cold on purpose, because he wanted actors shivering to look real. Speaking of directors pushing too far, Alfred Hitchcock was infamous for it. In The Birds, he promised Tippi Hedren that mechanical birds would be used in the famous attic attack scene. Instead, he ordered real birds tied to her costume and thrown at her repeatedly. She was scratched, pecked, and traumatized. By the end, she collapsed in exhaustion and suffered a nervous breakdown. But Hitchcock wasn't the only one to blur cruelty in art. In Oldboy, the Korean thriller, Choi Min-sik actually ate a live octopus on camera. Not once, but 4 times, because director Park Chan-wook wanted multiple takes. Min-sik, who is a Buddhist vegetarian, prayed for the creature's soul before every bite. What you see on screen is no prop, it's real. And here's something few people realize about the Terminator. The line "I'll be back" almost didn't happen. Arnold Schwarzenegger struggled with English and wanted to say "I will be back," because it sounded easier. James Cameron insisted on "I'll be back." That throwaway line became one of the most iconic catchphrases in film history. Now, let's go into horror again. In Jaws, the mechanical shark, nicknamed Bruce, constantly broke down in the salty water. Spielberg was forced to show the shark less, relying on music and tension instead. That accident created one of the most terrifying suspense films ever, proving sometimes failure makes a movie scarier. But some accidents were far more dangerous. In Ben-Hur, 1959, during the famous chariot race, one stuntman was thrown from his chariot in a brutal crash. The footage looked so authentic that rumors spread he died during filming. While he survived with injuries, his accident was kept in the final cut, shocking audiences worldwide. And then there's The Revenant. Leonardo DiCaprio went through hell for that role. He actually slept inside animal carcasses, ate raw bison liver despite being vegetarian, and filmed in freezing temperatures so brutal that cameras would stop working. When he finally won his long-awaited Oscar for the film, many believed it was because he endured one of the toughest shoots in modern history. Here's a fact you won't believe until you look it up. In Apocalypse Now, Dennis Hopper was so heavily addicted to drugs that director Coppola couldn't get him to remember his lines. Instead, Hopper was given lines in pieces, whispered to him just before the cameras rolled, making his chaotic performance completely authentic. And finally, let's go back to The Wizard of Oz one more time. The snow that falls on Dorothy and her friends in the poppy field scene? It wasn't harmless fake snow. It was industrial asbestos. At the time, no one realized how dangerous it was. The cast was literally showered in toxic material for the sake of magic. And so, this is where we close the reel. You've heard stories of curses, accidents, obsession, and genius, the kinds of truths about films that most people never imagine when they sit down with popcorn in front of the screen. Movies promise us illusions, but behind those illusions are broken bones, sleepless nights, lightning strikes, toxic paint, and sacrifices that go far beyond acting. I am Apple, and this was Apple Knows Channel. Remember, every frame of film carries more than a story, it carries the weight of the people who lived, suffered, and sometimes even died to bring it to life. Cinema is not just entertainment. It's a history of madness and miracles. Until next time, keep your eyes open, because the truth behind the movies is always stranger than fiction.